Okay, well, let's see. If you've got a Bible, why don't you turn to John's Gospel, chapter 5. And I'd like to read with the first verse. In John's Gospel, chapter 5, it says, "After this there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a great multitude of impotent folk, of blind, halt, withered, waiting for the moving of the water. For an angel went down at a certain season into the pool and troubled the water. Whosoever then first after the troubling of the water stepped in was made whole of whatsoever disease he had. And a certain man was there, which had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case, he said unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? The impotent man answered and said, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool. But while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, took up his bed, and walked. And the same day was the Sabbath." And, of course, the story goes on in the sense that the religious people that were there didn't like the fact that he was carrying his bed on the Sabbath day, and they gave him a hard time about that. And he said, well, the man that made me whole, he told me to carry my bed. And, there was a big argument about it. And that's not what we want to look at today, but the thing we want to focus on is, first of all, Jesus working. The bottom line in this account is that Jesus is at work and worked in this man's life to make him whole. That's the bottom line of the message. And, I have to think to myself, again, I think I said this last week, when John writes this gospel, at the very end he says, I suppose if all the things that Jesus said and did were written down, the world itself could not contain the books. Now that's how he concludes this, or that's what he says towards the end of this gospel. So we have to think to ourselves, John put the things in that he wanted to put in. He says there's so many things we could say about Jesus that the world couldn't contain all the books. So the things that he did put in are on purpose, we have to assume, and important. And so what we can observe about this is, first of all, Jesus comes to make the man whole, and the reason this is there for us the reader should draw the conclusion that if he made this man whole, he can make me whole, or bring wholeness to us as well. The first thing I notice about the man that is made whole in this case, or in this story, in this account, is that he's been in this condition a long time. It says he had an infirmity, 38 years. We don't know what his infirmity was. Infirmity could just mean a weakness or an inability or incapacity. We don't know what exactly was wrong with him, but evidently he was, at least as far as he was concerned, powerless to help himself. He was not able to do anything for himself, because when Jesus said to him, Wilt thou be made whole? He answered and said, I have no man when the water is troubled to put me into the pool. So we don't know what's wrong exactly with him physically, and we don't know, evidently he wasn't born with this condition. It's something that happened, because it doesn't say he was born this way, it just said he was like this for 38 years. But that's a long time. 38 years is a long time to be unable to do anything. So he's incapacitated. But what I notice is, not only is he physically unable to do anything, but he's got more binding him. He's got more problems than just his physical condition. And that's revealed by what he says. When Jesus said, Wilt thou be made whole? His answer is, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me in the pool. But while I'm coming, another steps down before me. Now, evidently, he's remembering some things that have happened in the past. And first of all, he says, I don't have anybody. And that's one thing. He's kind of feeling sorry for himself. He's feeling bad. I don't have anybody. There's nobody here to help me. Evidently, the other people, maybe he's looking around. They've all got friends, family. So he's feeling bad about himself for that. And then he's looking also at things that have happened in the past. And he's feeling bad about those things. He's sort of pitting himself over what has happened in the past. And that sense of, I can't do anything about it, I don't have anybody, and things have happened in the past that have, he's evidently still, these things are very current to him. We don't know how long ago it was that the water was last troubled. And evidently somebody stepped in before him, but he's remembering that. And I think that's significant, what he says, because not only can physical sickness and disease cause us problems, and it can, let's not put that down or say that, diminish the importance of being well physically, but other things can cause us problems beyond just physical sickness and disease. Things happen in life that can wound us on the inside and make us feel incapacitated emotionally and all kinds of other ways. But whatever the case, whether it's outside or inside, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's some kind of other way, Jesus can make us whole. Jesus has that to do. That's his job. Jesus brings wholeness, and I think it's interesting that's what he says, wilt thou be made whole? And I think that's a good way to look at it. Jesus comes to make us whole. Now that's all very interesting, and what's even more interesting about it is what Jesus does to help this man, what Jesus does to make him whole. It says, when Jesus knew that he had been a long time in that case, verse 6, when he knew he'd been a long time in that case, he first said to him, wilt thou be made whole? This is very interesting to me. He approached him with a question. It said he knew. It said he knew, right there in the text. It said he saw him and he knew that he'd been a long time in that condition. And when he knew that, he went to him and first asked him a question. Now this is very interesting to me, especially when we consider what this is saying against the way we think sometimes and assume that God works. And sometimes we assume, what we think is, if Jesus saw him in that condition and knew what was wrong, that somehow he would wave a magic wand over him or somehow make him, make something happen. But he came and asked him a question first. And the question he asked him is, wilt thou be made whole? Now I think what he's saying is, do you want to be made whole? And that's interesting. He's asking him to engage his own will and his own consent. Could I say it that way? He doesn't come and do it against his will or without his consent. And I think that's something that John is endeavoring to get across to us as the readers about the way God works in our lives. When I was reading this earlier this morning and yesterday, what it reminded me of and made me think of immediately, you might not get this connection right away, you might not think this is what you would think of, but when I read this and was pondering this about when Jesus said, wilt thou be made whole, and the fact that he's asking him to engage his own will and his own participation in this, it reminded me of Genesis in the very beginning of the Bible, where God said, let us make man in our own image and in our own likeness. And I think that means more than that mankind has 2 legs and 2 arms and pretty head of hair. I think that means not a resemblance. I think when it says that man is made in the likeness of God, it means man is made to be God-like, in the sense that God gives to humankind, gives to man a divine prerogative or a God-like capacity. Many, more than one. I think creativity is one of those things. Human beings are creative. That's a reflection of God, I think, because he's a creator. There are a lot of things we could talk about. Mankind, of all the living creation, is the only part of creation that has the power of speech, that can deal in the realm of words. That's a God thing. But beyond those, the other thing that is like God and is divine in its connection is the capacity to choose, the capacity to will and to choose for yourself. Now, as I understand reading about angels, they don't have a choice. They obey what God says and they go here and go there. But human beings have the capacity to exercise will and to be autonomous human beings. And evidently God wanted it to be that way. And evidently he doesn't violate the will of a human being, even to the extreme extent of helping us against our will. That's why I think Jesus, he wants to help this man, but he first is saying, will you participate? Do you want to be made whole? Because he's not going to be made whole without his participation. Does that make sense? And it would be nice, sometimes we look around and people come across our path, we like to be helpful sometimes. But it's true in our ability